Yeah, so welcome everyone to the second video installment of Archetypes in the News. I'd just like to say that this project was conceived originally as a Facebook group and exists as a Facebook group. And the initial post there was on Weinstein and Charlie Rose and Matt Lauer and Roy Moore and Kevin Spacey and all of the people who have Mars-Pluto alignments that were in the news for sexual misconduct allegations. And there's a written post on Archetypes in the News Facebook group that if you're welcome to check out there. And we will address that at the end of this segment on the new revelations surrounding Steve Wynn, the head of the Republican National Committee, who has now been forced to resign because of sexual misconduct allegations. And he is another Mars-Pluto example of the shadow expression of what the Mars-Pluto combination can represent. And so, but to begin, I'd like to thank everyone for all the comments and the discussion. I was really enriched by it, and I encourage everyone to make further comments on this post and anything that you have questions about or comments or discrepancies. Please feel free to let me know, and I'll try to respond as quickly as I can. And this episode, we're just going to focus on the Mercury-Pluto alignment. Last week or 2 weeks ago, Mercury was here with Saturn when we were discussing the consequences of the Fire and Fury book and Trump's comments on shithole countries in Africa, blah, blah, blah. And now, this week, the past 2 weeks, Mercury's moved through alignment with Pluto over the past several days. And we've seen a tremendous amount of focus on secrets, the FBI texts that were missing that surrounded secret societies, and the tremendous amount of revelations that have come out of the Russia investigation surrounding how many interviews Mueller has done that we weren't aware of. Which is pretty much everyone that I can gather except for Bannon and Trump now. So it's closing in for sure, which really fits Saturn opposing Donald Trump's Mercury, which we discussed last week. And the other really amazing Mercury-Pluto revelations that took place this week was all the focus on secret societies and the FBI texts that were lost, and all of the people on the Fox News network who were just like, conspiracy, and cabal within the federal, the DOJ and against Trump. And this is all paranoid thinking. I mean, not that they necessarily believed it, but it surrounds like that paranoid thinking and conspiracy theory and the secrets that are there. And you often see sometimes with Mercury-Pluto in people's natal charts and also just in the culture, a tendency to think more paranoidly and to think there are things that are beneath the surface that we don't understand, and to kind of the mind gets intensified by Pluto and it digs deeper. And I honestly fell victim to it myself. The lost texts were supposedly from April to May 17th, which was the day that Mueller was hired, which is, on its face seems interestingly a coincidence, if not, potentially something that's trying to be repressed. So it was easy for me to also think, oh, wow, is this a conspiracy? And so my mind went there for a minute, and then I was kind of like, no, probably not. And turns out they found the emails or the text, and a lot of the rhetoric that was being avowed by the Republicans and Fox News were saying that there is this secret society rhetoric amongst the text, and it turns out that was a joke. I mean, it seemed on its face really that they were joking, because they criticized Hillary and all sorts of people in their back and forth texts. So it wasn't just about Trump. And it's fascinating that like all of this being revealed now, the focus on conspiracy theories, and how it's made its kind of way to the prominent discourse in the past week. So yeah, I wanted to bring that to our attention. And I'd also like to take a look at the revelation that just came out I think 2 days ago, that Don McGahn, the White House counsel for Donald Trump, for the White House, the counsel for the presidency, who was John Dean was the person for Nixon, who was in the same place as Don McGahn. And what's interesting is the revelation that came out this week under the Mercury-Pluto alignment corresponds to a revelation that Trump tried to fire or wanted to fire Mueller back in June of 2017, and Don McGahn threatened to quit if Trump went through with that. And what's important about this is that he did that so that he would not be incriminated. I mean, I'm guessing here, but it seems like he's doing that so that he thought he would be incriminated potentially in an obstruction of justice, because that is, I guess, the way he was seeing the fact that if Trump went through with firing Mueller, that it would be obstruction of justice, and he didn't want to be involved. So it's interesting that John Dean, on the other hand, was involved in the cover-up for Watergate, but then when he realized he was going to be the scapegoat, that's when he went to the special counsel and special prosecutor and got immunity and spilled the beans on Nixon. So instead of being involved and potentially being incriminated, Don McGahn seems to have decided not to involve himself. And a lot of people think that the leak that came out this week actually came from Don McGahn, came from his sources surrounding him, because he is basically, I think, seeing the tracks come to an end on the train here, and doesn't want to be involved, and shows that he's not hopefully not incriminated himself. So that all fits the Mercury-Pluto, kind of the secrets being revealed that were hidden from us. But what's interesting is that Pluto continues to move closer and closer to Donald Trump's Saturn in opposition here, and I believe we're going to see the vice kind of continue to tighten on his reality, and then again, like we discussed last week, Saturn closer and closer now to Mercury, to his opposition to his natal Mercury. And what I left out last week that I focused a lot on in the Facebook post is that he has natal Mercury square Neptune, and this is the part of him that has a real difficulty with the truth. Like, Neptune is the imagination and the stream and flow of consciousness. It's not like grounded factual reality that everyone agrees upon, which is Saturn. So like the Mercury-Neptune alignment is more like the stream and flow of consciousness and like saying what comes to mind, but then in its shadow form, it's like not being able to see clearly what the Saturn realities are, and then also like believing in one's own imagination, often like believing in one's own ideas and getting trapped in them. And this seems to be what we're witnessing a lot with Donald Trump, is this kind of inability to see the facts and stick with a narrative even that is coherent and has like a logic and a structure and to it. Not entirely, but often this seems to be the case. And this really fits the Mercury in a challenging alignment with Neptune in its shadow form expression. Bob Dylan had Mercury square Neptune, and he was a genius poet. Gemini, no less. I mean, it's just, it doesn't have to come through in that way. It's just that it happens to be coming through in that way in Donald Trump's experience. So, I just wanted to point that out as far as backing up a little bit into last week's discourse. And then I really like to thank Flynn in the comments, who pointed out that I actually realized, in the post that I posted last week, no, it's not there. So in the post that I posted last week, I actually had Donald Trump's birth time incorrect. And Flynn pointed it out, and I was hoping that someone would do that. I realized it just before I posted it last week, but what's great about the archetypal astrological approach is you don't really need a birth time. A noon time is great. You can really do a lot with that. And what I did in my analysis last week didn't address the birth time or the ascendant in any way. And so I was just I left it there in a sense of kind of demonstrating how much information you can gather from even not having an accurate birth time for a natal chart. But when you actually put the eclipse on top of his natal chart in the correct birth time, which he has a 29-degree Leo ascendant rising, the eclipse that took place on August 21st was at 28 Leo, which was just a degree away from his ascendant and on his Mars, which we discussed, and then the Charlottesville incident and all of that. So, but what's interesting is that because it's on his ascendant and Mars is rising really tightly on his ascendant, the ascendant is the moment-to-moment interaction. It's how you interact with the world from moment to moment, and it's kind of what you present. It's what you lead with. And he leads with the Mars. It's got this fiery red, energy, and he's, combative and aggressive, overly aggressive at times. I mean, I don't say always, but like what's interesting about the eclipse, what I was mentioning last week, is just it's unleashed potential shadow dimensions of this complex, and it seems to be kind of radiating out into the public discourse. And so another really interesting thing that I've been researching as far as, because what's happening now on top of Pluto opposing Trump's natal Saturn is he's moving into his Saturn opposition. This is his third Saturn opposition. And you get one at 14. He had one, 30 years after that, which is from 1989 through 91. And what took place in 89 through 91 is Saturn made that opposition with his natal Saturn. So that's Saturn here at 25 Capricorn to 23 Cancer. And what's fascinating about this period is this is when he had his first bankruptcy. And all of his successive bankruptcies took place in the next 7 to 9 years, which is that whole Saturn quarterly cycle to where it squared itself again. What's really interesting about this is, so this is the Saturn return for this event. This is the first time he was really caught in what turns out to be bad business practices, or however you want to chalk it up. But a lot of people believe that this is where he started to take on a lot of Russian money, oligarchic money, into his real estate businesses to kind of prop him up, and because he was struggling so much through the casinos. So anyway, that's just part of what's taking place. I think it's part of like the Rus coming home to bear, and it's the consequences of his actions that we're all going to be going through, because this is the 89 version, but today we're going to get Pluto with it as well. So it's intensified and made more dramatic, and the potential for even more dire consequences and difficulty surrounding it for him personally. But again, we're all going to go through this alignment, and also don't want to put all negative energy on it. It's there's a lot of like moral strengthening that comes from this. I mean, we're facing the shadow in a lot of ways, and we're potentially a moral strengthening can take place within the culture or within anyone and the society, and to face the shadow, to bring a consensus judgment. It doesn't have to be harsh, but a judgment on what's been repressed, Pluto, and hopefully bring our culture and ourselves in more alignment with a noble side of the Saturnian expression rather than a less integral dimension of it. So that's what I wanted to say about Donald Trump this week. Kind of went overboard a little bit, but Steve Wynn, fascinating character, another billionaire casino operator who has now been another in the long lineage of sexual misconduct allegations. He was the head of the RNC, I don't know for how long, but he's now obviously resigned. And he has Mars in a tight square with Pluto, just 4 degrees from exact, a little less, 3.5. And it's also in a T-square with the Sun, so 7 Aquarius to 4 Leo to 8 Taurus. So tight Sun, Mars, Pluto T-square. And he's now been resigned for the long list of sexual misconduct allegations, which are a tremendous amount from what I understand. It's bordering on the Weinstein case. So I don't actually have Weinstein up here, but let's just go through. I mean, this is Bill Cosby. He's born with Sun, Pluto, trine Mars. Matt Lauer is born with Mars square to Pluto. And John Conyers is born with a wide Mars-Pluto conjunction, but it's squared by Venus on both sides. So he's squared Venus-Pluto and Venus to Mars, and the midpoint is almost exact, so it really draws them together. And then Roy Moore, obviously Predators, Mars opposite Pluto, just 2 degrees from exact, 13 to 11 Leo. And Donald Trump, of course, our Predator-in-Chief, who had Mars. It's a super wide conjunction. You really wouldn't consider that, but what happens is you put Saturn on the other side, and that midpoints to Pluto, and you get the Mars rising effect. And he's definitely a Mars Saturn Pluto figure. He like fights with like a veracity and intensity of reactionary, defeat, which is a Mars Saturn kind of energy. I mean, this is kind of his MO. Like, where's my Roy Cohn to defend me? Another Mars Saturn, or I think Saturn Pluto figure. So yeah, a few of the things that I recognized this week. And I mean, lo and behold, like Stormy Daniels, I mean, which would have in any normal presidency or lead would have been a lead story in a week like this, but had a sexual affair during or after the pregnancy of his son with Melania, and paid $130,000 through a shell company in Delaware through his lawyer to repress the story on October 15th of 2016, right before the election. So again, just an amazing Mercury-Pluto secret that was again revealed this week, that just barely made the headlines due to everything else that's going on. So yeah, again, please leave your comments and questions in the comments below, and I look forward to next week, or maybe a bi-weekly thing here. So yeah, I hope everyone's doing well, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.